Noah's unease didn't begin with a single moment of panic, but with a slow, creeping realization that something about Nick had shifted. At first, it was subtly an odd quietness, a strange pattern of absences, and the way Nick seemed to close off the moment anyone tried to ask too many questions. For a Newman, secrecy was nothing new, and Noah had grown up understanding that protecting the family often meant carrying burdens in silence. But this was different. This wasn't the usual guarded strategy or calculated restraint. This felt heavier, darker, like Nick wasn't simply hiding information, was hiding a part of himself that had crossed into dangerous territory. And the most alarming part was that Nick didn't look like someone who was struggling with the decision anymore. He looked like someone who had already decided, and who was now living inside that decision with a frightening kind of certainty. What intensified Noah's concern was Matt Clark's mysterious disappearance. The name alone carried a certain poison, a reminder of threats and cruelty that never stayed buried for long. Yet this time, Matt didn't vanish with chaos or noise. He disappeared cleanly, as if someone had erased him from the surface of the world. There were no credible rumors, no clear clues, no trace that could be followed. And that silence felt unnatural. People like Matt didn't simply fade away unless they were forced to. Noah noticed how the conversation always shifted when Matt came up, how faces tightened, how the air changed the second Noah entered the room. It was as if everyone was silently agreeing not to say his name too loudly. And when Noah looked at Nick, he didn't see relief in his father's eyes, saw tension that never truly relaxed. The kind of tension that suggested unfinished violence rather than resolution. Noah began to observe Nick more carefully. The absences became more frequent. Nick's explanations were vague, his patience thinner, and his demeanor sharper, as if the world itself had become something he needed to control by force. Noah saw signs that terrified him, fatigue that looked like sleeplessness, a hardness in Nick's face that didn't soften even around family, and a kind of restless intensity that made it feel as though Nick was constantly preparing for something. Noah didn't want to believe what his instincts were suggesting. He didn't want to imagine that Nick, his father, the man Noah had always believed possessed a strong moral core, beneath all the Newman ruthlessness, could be capable of something truly criminal. Still, Noah could not ignore the warnings forming in his mind. The more Nick avoided questions, the more Noah felt compelled to dig deeper, not out of curiosity, but out of fear that if no one stopped Nick now, something irreversible would happen. The trail led Noah to Nick's farm, a place that was supposed to represent distance from the chaos of the city and the constant wars of power. Yet when Noah arrived there, the property didn't feel peaceful anymore. The land looked the same, but the atmosphere felt tainted, as if tranquility had been replaced with a quiet kind of dread. Noah moved cautiously, trying not to announce his intent, trying to convince himself that he was simply checking on Nick, that he was being responsible, that he had a right to understand why his father was acting so strangely. But the deeper he searched, the more his anxiety sharpened into certainty. Something was hidden here. Something was buried. Noah scanned the area methodically, letting logic guide him even as his heart pounded with every step. The fear he carried wasn't only about what he might find. It was also about what finding it would mean for everything he thought he knew about Nick. Then he discovered an expertly concealed hatch disguised beneath the earth, in a remote section of the farm. It wasn't obvious at first, which made it more disturbing. It was too well planned, too deliberate, too carefully hidden to be accidental. Noah's stomach turned as he examined the ground, noticing faint details that didn't belong. The moment he managed to uncover the entrance, his entire body tensed as if his instincts were screaming for him to stop. But he couldn't. Not anymore. Noah opened the hidden access and stared down into darkness that felt colder than it should have been. As he descended, the air itself seemed to change, heavy with the unmistakable sense of confinement and suffering. What Noah saw in that underground room shattered him. Matt Clark was the imprisoned, restrained, and visibly brutalized. This wasn't simple captivity. It wasn't a temporary hold. It was systematic cruelty inflicted with purpose. Matt's condition revealed a pattern of pain meant to break him down, to force information out of him through fear and agony. Noah felt sick, not because he sympathized with Matt, but because the reality of what was happening had crossed every moral boundary. Noah believed his family still respected Matt was a monster in many ways, but what was being done to him was not justice. It was torture. And the thought that Nick had become the person delivering that torture made Noah's chest tighten with disbelief, grief, and horror. Before Noah could process what he was seeing, he sensed movement behind him. The sound of footsteps from above was enough to freeze his blood. Then Nick appeared, standing at the entrance with a calmness that felt almost inhuman. Nick didn't stumble into the scene as though caught in wrongdoing. He didn't flinch or panic. He looked prepared, as if this moment had always been inevitable. Noah turned to face him, and for a brief second, Noah hoped to find shame in his father's expression, some signal that this had gone too far, that Nick still understood the enormity of what he had done. But what Noah saw instead was a controlled intensity, the look of a man convinced that he was doing what had to be done. Nick confessed without hesitation. He admitted he was torturing Matt to force answers out of him, answers about the plots against the Newman family, about the dark secrets Matt carried, about the enemies who might still be circling, waiting to strike. Nick framed it like strategy, like necessity, like survival. In his mind, this was not a descent into evil, but a protective act meant to prevent greater harm. That was what terrified Noah the most. Not only that Nick had crossed the line, but that Nick no longer recognized the line as something sacred. Nick spoke as though the ends could justify anything, as though fear and violence were tools he was entitled to use as long as the family remained safe. Noah's shock turned into a deep, burning conflict inside his chest. He confronted Nick not with raised voices or drama, but with a furious refusal to accept what he was seeing. Noah could not tolerate the idea that his father was now operating outside the law, outside morality, outside humanity. Noah didn't deny that the Newman family had enemies. He didn't deny that Matt Clark was dangerous. But Noah refused to accept torture as an answer. In that underground space, the tension between father and son became unbearable, thick with betrayal and desperation. Nick, hardened by fear and rage, believed Noah didn't understand what was at stake. Noah, devastated and furious, believed Nick no longer understood what he was becoming. The conflict escalated quickly. Noah realized he wasn't simply arguing with Nick, he was standing in the path of a man who had already decided to become something darker if it meant winning. Noah saw the risk clearly. Nick was not only committing a crime, he was transforming into the kind of threat the Newman family had always claimed to oppose. And Noah couldn't ignore how easily this could spiral into something even worse. If Nick continued, Matt might not survive. If Matt didn't survive, Nick's fate would be sealed forever, and the Newman family's future would be stained beyond repair. Noah understood that what was happening in this basement wasn't just an isolated horror. It was the birth of a new dangeroni that lived inside his own bloodline. Now Noah faced the most agonizing decision of his life. He could report Nick and expose everything, dragging the Newman name into public ruin and forcing Nick to face the legal consequences of what he had done. Or Noah could try to stop Nick in secret, preventing further harm without destroying the family from the outside. Either choice came with a cost so brutal Noah could feel it tightening around him like a noose. Reporting Nick would feel like betraying his father, even if it was morally correct. Keeping silent would feel like betraying himself, his principles, and the very idea of justice. Noah stood there realizing that the truth was not something he could unsee, and the longer he kept it hidden, the more he would become part of it. Noah made a quiet decision in his own mind: had to stop this before it was too late. Not because Matt deserved rescue, but because Nick needed to be stopped. Because every additional hour Matt remained trapped underground was another hour. Nick sank deeper into something monstrous. Noah began to form a plan to free Matt and force the truth into the light in the only way he could, by preventing Nick from continuing down this path. It would require secrecy, caution, and courage. Because if Nick discovered Noah's intentions too early, the consequences could be catastrophic. Noah wasn't naive enough to believe he could simply talk Nick into stopping. Nick had already rationalized the violence. Nick had already convinced himself that this was protection, that the family's safety demanded sacrifice. And Noah knew that logic couldn't easily compete with obsession. As Noah left the basement, the weight inside him was crushing. The farm looked the same above ground-wide sky, quiet land. The illusion of peace, but Noah understood now that beneath it lay a hidden hell. And within Nick lay a darkness Noah never imagined he would witness. Noah carried the truth like a wound, and he could feel it changing him already. The hardest part wasn't only the fear of what Nick might do next. It was the grief of realizing that the person Noah trusted most had crossed a line that could never truly be erased. Noah didn't want to hate Nick. He didn't want to lose him. But Noah couldn't pretend this was acceptable. And he couldn't pretend it wouldn't destroy everything if it continued. In the end, Noah's warning to himself became clear: if he didn't act, Nick would become the kind of criminal he claimed to be fighting. Noah wasn't just trying to save Matt. Noah was trying to save Nick from himself. And trying to save the Newman family from the consequences of a choice made in darkness. And when Noah finally looked out across the quiet land, he felt the kind of dread that lingers long after the moment passes. Because he knew what was coming next would not be simple. It would be painful, dangerous, and possibly devastating. Noah had stepped into the truth, and now the truth was gripping him back, forcing him to choose between blood and justice, love and morality, silence and destruction. And if I'm being honest, this is the kind of storyline that stays in your chest even after you stop thinking about it. Because it doesn't just ask what Nick is capable of, it asks what anyone is capable of. When fear takes over, when protection turns into obsession, and when the person you love most becomes the person you might have to stop. Noah's situation feels like a nightmare that's too real, the kind where you know what the right thing is, but you also know the right thing might break you. There's something haunting about imagining him standing on that farm, surrounded by open air and endless space, while knowing that underground a man is suffering and above ground his father is unraveling. The tragedy isn't only what Nick did, it's that Nick probably believes he's saving his family, while Noah is the one forced to carry the burden of seeing the truth clearly. The real question now isn't whether Noah will act, it's whether he can act fast enough before Nick's secret becomes a permanent stain that no Newman power can erase. Noah never intended to invade Nick's private world. He was only following the smallest signs, the faintest fragments of something off that other people might have ignored, because the Newman family had always lived in a constant state of defense. But Noah's instincts refused to stay quiet. They kept tapping at his mind like cold metal, reminding him that this silence was no longer the ordinary kind of secrecy he had grown up with. Nick had changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but through a quiet pressure that felt almost unbearable. He was absent more often, his eyes always seemed to be calculating, and the way he dodged harmless questions made Noah feel as though a door was being slammed shut in his face. Matt Clark's disappearance was too clean, too tidy. And that tidiness was what frightened Noah most, because men like Matt did not simply vanish unless someone had put their hands on his fate. Noah began moving with the suffocating feeling of someone who desperately wanted to believe his father was still protecting the family, while also fearing that Nick had already crossed a line he might never return from. Noah searched for answers not out of curiosity but out of a raw, almost instinctive worry. He understood Nick better than most people did in one painful way. Nick was the kind of man who would destroy himself before allowing anyone else to carry the damage. And because of that, Noah could not stay calm when he sensed Nick walking a path guided by violence and desperation. He began tracking the pattern: sudden trips, unexplained gaps in time, phone calls that ended the moment Noah appeared. Noah didn't need confirmation from anyone else. The tension in Nick's eyes was enough to warn him that this secret was being guarded with force, not with caution. It felt like a boulder hanging over the entire family, and Nick was the only one gripping the rope. Noah knew the rope would snap if there was even the smallest miscalculation. And when it snapped, it wouldn't just crush Matt. It would drag them all down. Noah returned to the farm, a place that had once represented rare quiet between the storms of the Newman Empire. But now the stillness there didn't smell like peace anymore. It felt like silence held in place by pressure, like a normal surface laid over something rotting underneath. Noah had visited before and seen Nick soften there, seen the hard lines in his face ease. This time, every step Noah took felt like stepping across thin ice. He moved carefully, trying not to make noise, trying not to alert someone he loved and feared at the same time. He searched in restraint, beginning with the smallest areas and slowly pushing into the places Nick rarely allowed anyone to enter. Noah wasn't even sure what he was searching for. He only knew he could not stop, because stopping would mean walking away. And living as though he hadn't felt the danger forming around Nick and Noah could no longer do that. He found the plan almost by accident, in the way fate seems to throw the truth into someone's hands before they are emotionally prepared to hold it. It wasn't sitting out like evidence meant to be discovered. It was hidden carefully, arranged as something Nick intended to control absolutely. But that carefulness made Noah's blood run cold. The notes, the timeline, the steps laid out like machinery. This wasn't a moment of rage. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a long-form strategy built with patience, designed by someone who had already chosen the dangerous road and accepted the cost. And what shattered Noah's breath was the reality that Nick wasn't planning to punish Matt the way Noah had feared. Nick was going further than that. He was turning Matt into a living chess piece, a human bait, meant to sit at the center of a complex trap, designed to lure out a larger criminal organization or a powerful figure operating behind Matt. Matt wasn't the enemy anymore. Matt was the hook Nick intended to use to pull up a bigger monster. Noah stared at those words and felt as if someone were squeezing his heart in their fist. It wasn't because he felt pity for Matt. Matt had created too much damage, too much fear, too many nightmares. But turning a person into living bait, that was a cruelty Noah could not accept. It was no longer protection. It was gambling with human life. Noah understood immediately what it meant for Nick to be targeting something bigger behind Matt. The threat they were facing wasn't limited to familiar enemies. There was a hand somewhere that had been controlling pieces. A force powerful enough to make Nick believe the only way to end it was through blood and risk. And that made Noah tremble. When a man like Nick feels cornered enough to create a trap that could kill, it means he no longer believes in any normal solution. The most terrifying part of the plan wasn't its complexity, but the way Nick completely ignored the danger it posed to everyone around him. In every stage, every point of contact, Noah could see the ways the trap would pull him in. And he saw something even worse: Sienna's presence drifting at the edge of it all. Like a shadow Nick had not fully protected from the blast zone. Sienna had no idea. That ignorance was what made Noah panic. In Nick's world, maybe Sienna was just an uncontrolled variable, something that could be handled later. But Noah did not see her that way. Noah saw her as a living person who could step into the wrong place at the wrong time and become collateral damage for Nick's mission to expose whoever stood behind Matt. Noah could not breathe through the thought. He could not bear the idea that Nick, the man Noah still wanted to believe would never place family on a scale, was now doing exactly that with cold focus. As though the cost was unavoidable, Noah fell into a state of paralysis that felt like being split in two. One part of him wanted to storm straight to Nick, throw the plan in front of him, and force him to stop immediately. But another part understood Nick would not stop simply because he was confronted. Nick had gone too far to return through conversation alone. If Noah revealed he knew, Nick might adapt the plan in ways that became even more dangerous and impossible to predict. Noah also couldn't call it betrayal to stop his father from making a fatal choice. Yet in a family like the Newmans, defying the head of the household could always be framed as betrayal. Noah asked himself if exposing Nick would destroy the family from the inside. He knew a public scandal wouldn't just shatter reputations. It would tear open already fragile relationships that had survived too many wars. But Noah also knew that silence would make him an accomplice. And that idea terrified him more than being hated. The truth was brutal: time was running out. Nick's plan had clear timing and trigger points that could not simply be delayed forever. Noah read through each line and felt like he could hear a clock pounding against his skull. He imagined Nick stepping into that trap with the confidence of someone who believed he had prepared for everything, while the enemy outside could dismantle it with a single unpredictable variable. A larger criminal organization or a powerful figure hiding behind Matt was not something that could be cornered easily. People like that always had escape routes, always had counterattacks, always had ways to turn someone else's trap into their grave. Noah understood Nick wanted to end it all in one strike. But fast endings were usually the bloodiest. And if Nick failed, the consequences would not simply be the failure to catch the mastermind. It could mean death. It could mean permanent disappearance. It could mean a tragedy Noah would never forgive himself for because he had known. And he had done nothing. Noah forced his fear into movement. He had no time for hesitation. He began searching for proof, not to destroy Nick, but to gather something strong enough to force Nick to step back, or at the very least, to break the trap before it could activate. Noah understood that charging at Nick with emotion alone would be useless. Nick would view it as weakness, as ignorance, as the complaint of a son who had never stared into the true darkness threatening them. Noah needed something undeniable, something solid, something that could show Nick this trap wasn't just dangerous, it was uncontrollable. It was bitterly painful for Noah to realize he had to think like an adult in the harshest sense. He was stepping into a psychological battlefield against his own father, and that realization made him feel isolated. In that moment, Noah understood that growing up wasn't freedom at all. Sometimes it was being forced to make a decision no one should ever have to make. He also thought about Matt. A part of Noah hated Matt so deeply that saving him felt impossible. But another, deeper part recognized that saving Matt right now wasn't about mercy, it was about disarming the bomb in Nick's hands. Matt was bait, which meant his life was the switch. If the bait was removed, the plan might collapse or at least be delayed. Noah didn't know what would happen after that. But he knew this: any future was less terrifying than watching Nick activate a trap that could kill them all. Noah's mind filled with the image of Sienna stepping into the blast radius without knowing what she was walking into, becoming a victim simply because she existed too close to Nick's obsession. Noah felt crushed by it. It was as though he stood surrounded by fire, and if he didn't choose a direction, he would burn alive in the slowest way possible. The more Noah studied the details, the more he saw an ugly truth. Nick's precision did not come from calmness, but from obsession. That obsession wore the mask of protection. But beneath it was something terrifying: Nick's fear of losing everything. Nick might call it strategy. He might call it strength. But Noah could see it as a silent scream from a man who no longer trusted the law, no longer trusted conventional solutions. Nick chose a trap because he believed a trap was the only way to force the mastermind to reveal themselves. But Noah saw something darker in that choice. Nick was turning into a man who carried the knife in the shadows. And once a person grows used to holding a knife, they stop knowing when to put it down. Noah couldn't stop himself from wondering if Nick was truly fighting the enemy outside, or the despair swallowing him from within. Noah walked across the land and everything around him felt sharper, colder. The wind still moved through the property, the sky was still wide. But Noah no longer saw freedom in it. He saw a massive stage for an explosion that already had a date and time. He considered exposing Nick and imagined the way Nick would look at him afterward. He considered staying silent and imagined the way he would look at himself in the mirror. There was no clean choice. There was no choice that wouldn't bleed. Noah understood that people love saying family is everything. But no one talks about how family can also be the place that forces you into your most brutal decisions. Noah didn't want to be the person who destroyed Nick. But he also refused to be the person who allowed Nick to destroy himself and drag everyone else down with him. As the hours passed, Noah felt urgency like physical pain. It was no longer vague fear, it was a countdown. He forced himself to stay sharp, to stay controlled, to move silently the way Nick always did. But for a completely different purpose, saving lives before they became tools. Noah knew he might need to find support, or at least gather enough evidence to neutralize the plan. But even thinking about it made him bitter, because in a world like the Newmans, finding an ally often meant admitting your own family wasn't safe enough to protect itself anymore. Noah hated that feeling. He hated having to doubt his father. He hated being trapped inside the darkness Nick had created. But he couldn't deny the reality: if he did nothing, the plan would spiral. And the cost would be lives, collapse, and a stain that even Newman power couldn't erase. And then, as Noah accepted there was no turning back, another heavy emotion hit him: grief. Not grief for Matt, but grief for Nick. Because Noah understood that people don't turn someone into living bait unless they've been pushed into desperation. Nick could call it necessity, but Noah saw it as a man being crushed by fear. The tragedy was that Nick genuinely believed he was saving the family, while the method he chose might be what destroyed them fastest. Noah felt like he was watching someone he loved walk straight into the abyss. And even screaming might not pull them back. But Noah still had to try. Because if he didn't, he would live the rest of his life with the knowledge that he had seen the warning signs and still chose fear over action. In the end, what makes this storyline truly haunting isn't just Nick's trap. It's the way power can convince someone that they have the right to gamble with human life in exchange for safety. And I can't deny the heaviness I feel imagining Noah holding that plan and shaking hands, not afraid of the enemy, but afraid of his own father. There's a unique kind of pain in realizing the person you love most can also become the person who is most dangerous. It isn't only betrayal. It's heartbreak mixed with terror. Noah isn't just trying to save Matt from being used as bait. He's trying to save Nick from the decision Nick has made, from the obsession turning him into a shadow of himself. And as time runs out, it feels like a breath caught in the throat, and cruel and painfully human. Because sometimes the most frightening enemy isn't the criminal organization or the powerful figure behind Matt, it's the moment Nick believes he can control everything. While Noah knows the truth, one small mistake is all it takes for this trap to catch no monster at all, but instead crush the people standing closest to it. And if Noah can't reach the plan in time, that night won't just be a shock. It will be the moment the Newman family shatters with an explosion no one will ever be able to repair. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.